Picture a packed stadium, 90,000 people on their feet, millions more watching from home. The roar, the tension, the moment a ball crosses a line and half the crowd loses their minds. Football, the world's most watched sport, a game so deeply woven into human culture that entire nations stop breathing during a 90-minute match. Now here's a question almost nobody can answer correctly. Who actually invented it? Most people will say England. Some will say a schoolboy named William Webb Ellis grabbed a ball and ran with it in 1823. A few historians will point to the Football Association in 1863 as the official origin. All of them are missing the real story. Because football, in its truest form, was being played thousands of years before any of those events, on different continents, by civilizations that had no contact with each other. And the version we think of as the original is actually one of the last to arrive. This is the real history of who invented football, and it goes much further back than England. Let's start in ancient China. Around 300 BCE during the Han Dynasty, soldiers played a game called cuju. The name translates roughly to kickball. The game involved a leather ball stuffed with feathers and hair, and the objective was to kick it through a small hole in a silk net suspended between two bamboo poles. No hands allowed, footwork only. Cuju wasn't casual recreation, it was military training. The Han military used it to improve soldiers' agility, stamina, and coordination. Courts kept official records of matches. The emperor himself was reportedly a fan. At its peak, Cuju had professional players, dedicated stadiums, and organized competitions that drew thousands of spectators. FIFA, the international governing body of modern football, officially recognizes Cuju as the earliest form of the game. Not Webb Ellis, not the Football Association, a Chinese military exercise from over 2,000 years ago. But Cuju wasn't the only ancient version running in parallel. In Japan, a game called Kemari emerged around 600 CE. Where Cuju was competitive, Kemari was cooperative. Players formed a circle and worked together to keep a ball in the air using only their feet, never letting it touch the ground. There were no winners and no losers. The whole point was elegance. Kemari was played by Japanese aristocracy in elaborate ceremonial robes. It required years of practice to master. The game still exists today, performed at traditional festivals across Japan, using the same rules it had 14 centuries ago. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs were playing something far more intense. The Mesoamerican ballgame predates both Cuju and Kemari by over 1,000 years. Archaeologists have found stone courts at sites across Mexico and Central America dating back to 1600 BCE. The game used a solid rubber ball, sometimes weighing as much as 4 kilograms, and players were not allowed to use their hands or feet. They could only strike the ball with their hips, thighs, and elbows. The courts were shaped like a capital letter I with stone rings mounted high on the walls. Getting the ball through a ring was so difficult it was considered extraordinary when it happened. The Mesoamerican ballgame was connected to religion, astronomy, and ritual. Some scholars believe certain matches ended with human sacrifice, though the historical record on exactly who was sacrificed and why remains disputed. What isn't disputed is that this game was central to Aztec society for over 3,000 years. 3 separate civilizations, 3 separate continents, all independently developing games built around a ball in the human body, none of them aware the others existed. So where does England come in? To understand that, you have to go to medieval Europe, and specifically to England in the centuries before anyone wrote down rules. Folk football, as historians call it, was chaos. Entire villages played against each other across open fields, sometimes covering miles of terrain. There were no fixed player counts, no formal boundaries, no referees. The ball could be carried, kicked, punched, or thrown. Matches sometimes lasted all day and frequently ended with injuries. The violence was significant enough that King Edward II banned the game in London in 1314, citing the great noise in the city caused by hustling over large balls. He wasn't the last monarch to try. English kings banned folk football repeatedly over the following centuries. It kept coming back anyway. The critical shift happened in the 1800s when English boarding schools started formalizing the game. Each school developed its own rules. Some allowed carrying the ball, some didn't. Some allowed tackling, some didn't. When boys from different schools tried to play together at university, nobody could agree on anything. This is the moment the William Webb Ellis legend enters the picture. The story goes that in 1823, during a match at rugby school, a student named William Webb Ellis caught the ball and ran forward with it instead of kicking it, breaking the established rules. That single act of rule breaking supposedly invented rugby football, creating the fork in the road between rugby and what would eventually become association football. The problem is there's almost no credible evidence this happened. The story wasn't written down until decades after the supposed event. No contemporary accounts mention it. The investigation conducted by the Old Rugbyian Society in 1895, 72 years after the alleged incident, relied entirely on the memory of one elderly man who claimed to have heard about it as a child. Most sports historians today treat the Webb Ellis story as a convenient myth, a founding legend that schools and sports bodies adopted because it made for a good origin story. What actually happened in 1863 is far more well documented and far more significant. That year, representatives from several London football clubs met at the Freemasons Tavern to establish a unified set of rules. After several meetings, they formed the Football Association and produced a formal rulebook. This was the birth of association football as an organized sport. But even here, the founding fathers of the Football Association were not inventing something from scratch. They were standardizing something that had already existed for centuries in various forms across England and, as we've seen, across the world. The word soccer itself comes from this period. It's a shortening of association, using a British slang convention of the time that added air to abbreviations. Association football became a saucer, and then simply soccer. The word is not American, it's English, coined in the 1880s by Oxford students. So what does all of this mean for the question of who actually invented football? The honest answer is that no single person and no single country invented it. The game emerged independently across multiple civilizations because kicking a ball is one of the most instinctive things a human being can do. Children in every culture throughout history have done it with whatever round object was available. What England genuinely contributed was standardization. The Football Association didn't invent the game, but it created the rule book that spread across the world through British colonialism and trade routes. When British sailors, soldiers, and merchants arrived in South America, Africa, and Asia in the 19th century, they brought that rulebook with them. Local populations took the game, made it their own, and in many cases eventually became far better at it than the country that exported the rules. Brazil won its first World Cup in 1958. Argentina, Uruguay, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. The countries that dominate modern football are almost never England, which hasn't won a World Cup since 1966. And remains, as any English supporter will tell you, with a mixture of sadness and dark humor, perpetually on the verge of ending that drought. The Chinese are increasingly funding research into Cuju's legacy, and there's a genuine academic debate about whether FIFA's recognition of Cuju as the first football game should carry more cultural weight than it currently does. Japan's Kemari practitioners still gather in Kyoto each year in full ceremonial dress to play the same cooperative game their ancestors played in the imperial court. The Mesoamerican ball court at Chichen Itza draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, and some archaeologists believe the game's influence on Mesoamerican religion was as profound as anything the church produced in medieval Europe. The story of football is really the story of something fundamental to human nature: the need to play, the need to compete, the need to gather and watch. No single civilization gets credit for discovering that. They all arrived at it separately because the impulse was already there. When you watch a match, the next time a ball arcs into the corner of the net and the crowd erupts, you are watching the product of over 3,000 years of human history. Han Dynasty soldiers kicking a feathered ball in a military courtyard. Japanese aristocrats in silk robes keeping a ball airborne through sheer precision. Aztec warriors striking a rubber sphere with their hips in a stone-walled court. Medieval English villagers charging across muddy fields in games with no rules and no end. And somewhere along the way, 11 men on a perfectly cut rectangle of grass inherited all of it. That's who invented football. Everyone did. No one owns it. That's probably why the whole world plays it.